The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Sarah Collins was sitting in her college library, highlighting passages in her business textbook, when her phone vibrated against the wooden table. Her Aunt Margaret had suffered a severe stroke. The doctors weren't optimistic. By the time Sarah arrived at the hospital, breathless and soaked from the downpour, her aunt was connected to a maze of tubes and monitors, her usually animated face now slack and unresponsive. In that sterile hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of machines keeping time, Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would put her education on hold to care for the woman who had been more like a mother to her than an aunt. "You can't be serious," James Bennett had said, when Sarah announced her intentions at the family meeting 2 days later. Her older cousin lounged in an expensive leather chair in Aunt Margaret's study, barely glancing up from his phone. "Just hire someone. That's what money is for." Daniel, James's younger brother by 4 years, nodded in agreement. "You're in your final year, Sarah. Don't throw away your degree to play nurse." But Sarah knew what Aunt Margaret would have done for her. The woman who had taken her in at 12 years old when her parents died in that terrible car accident deserved nothing less than family at her side, not strangers paid to care, regardless of how professional they might be. "I've made up my mind," Sarah said quietly but firmly. "I'll take a leave of absence from school. The dean said I can return when I'm ready." James shrugged, already bored with the conversation. "Your funeral. Don't expect us to bail you out when you're 30 with no degree and no prospects." What her cousins would never understand was that some debts could never be repaid with money. The way Aunt Margaret had sat beside her bed every night for months after the accident, reading stories until Sarah fell asleep. How she'd attended every school play, every award ceremony, camera in hand and pride shining in her eyes. The thousands of small kindnesses that formed the foundation of Sarah's world. The first weeks were the hardest. Aunt Margaret required round-the-clock care, feeding, bathing, medication management, physical therapy exercises. Sarah learned to interpret the slightest changes in her aunt's expression, to anticipate her needs before they were communicated through the laborious blinks and slight hand movements that were now her primary mode of communication. She moved into the east wing of her aunt's sprawling Victorian home, converting a sitting room adjacent to her aunt's bedroom into her own sleeping quarters so she could be nearby at all hours. James visited once a month, usually when he needed something. He would breeze in wearing tailored suits that cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe, kiss his mother's forehead perfunctorily, and launch into updates about the family jewelry business that Aunt Margaret had built from nothing into a regional empire. "The Boston location is finally turning a profit," he announced during one such visit, 3 months after his mother's stroke. "I told you firing that manager was the right call." Sarah, arranging fresh flowers by her aunt's bedside, noticed the slight downturn of Margaret's mouth, the expression she had come to recognize as disapproval. Daniel's visits were even rarer and briefer. He usually arrived with an expensive gift, a cashmere blanket, a state-of-the-art tablet, items that demonstrated both his wealth and his complete lack of understanding about his mother's current needs and limitations. As spring turned to summer, something unexpected began to happen. Aunt Margaret started improving. Her speech, while still slurred, became intelligible. Her right side remained mostly paralyzed, but her left hand grew stronger, more capable, and most remarkably, her mind remained as sharp as ever. One evening, as Sarah was reading aloud from one of her aunt's favorite novels, Margaret interrupted her. "Enough Jane Austen for tonight," she said slowly, each word a victory. "Tell me what you're learning." Sarah looked up, confused. "Learning? About business? Watching me all these years? Your degree?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm not really studying right now, Aunt Margaret." Her aunt's eyes narrowed, a familiar look that had intimidated business competitors for decades. Unacceptable. That single word changed everything. The following day, Sarah brought her abandoned textbooks from her apartment. She set up a small desk in the corner of her aunt's bedroom, and each day, between therapy sessions and doctor appointments, medication schedules and meal preparations, Sarah studied. More remarkably, Aunt Margaret began to teach. "The jewelry business isn't about jewelry," she told Sarah one afternoon, her speech improving weekly with therapy. "It's about moments, milestones, making people feel special." She paused, gathering strength. "What's our profit margin on engagement rings?" Sarah blinked. "I don't know." "Find out, then tell me why it matters." It was the beginning of the most unusual business education anyone could receive. Margaret Bennett had built Bennett Jewelers from a tiny storefront into 15 locations across 3 states. She understood market expansion, inventory management, personnel development, and customer psychology in ways no textbook could capture. And now, from her sickbed, she began downloading 4 decades of hard-earned wisdom to her niece. "Your cousins," Margaret said one day, 6 months into Sarah's new role as both caregiver and apprentice. "They know the numbers, not the people." Her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Sarah helped her take a sip before responding. "James is actually quite good with the financial side," Sarah said diplomatically. Margaret's laugh was a shadow of its former robust self, but the wry humor remained. Numbers without heart, like cooking without tasting. It was during this period that Sarah first noticed Nathan Miller, the new gardener. The previous landscaping service had been dismissed, another of James's cost-cutting measures, and replaced with a single groundskeeper responsible for maintaining the extensive gardens that had been Margaret's pride and joy. Sarah would often see him from her aunt's window, working methodically through the overgrown beds, gradually restoring order to the neglected landscape. "He does good work," Aunt Margaret observed one morning, following Sarah's gaze to where Nathan was pruning the heritage roses. "Not just doing a job, creating something." Sarah found herself making excuses to venture outside during Nathan's working hours. She brought him glasses of lemonade during hot afternoons, asked his advice about which flowers might brighten her aunt's room. He was tall, with shoulders broadened by physical labor rather than gym workouts, his face tanned from hours in the sun. Unlike the polished businessmen in Sarah's former social circle, Nathan's hands were calloused, his clothes functional rather than fashionable. But when he spoke about plants, the conditions they needed to thrive, the patience required to nurture them, his face transformed, revealing a passion and intelligence that Sarah found increasingly appealing. "Your cousins don't like me much," Nathan mentioned one day as Sarah helped him plant tulip bulbs for the following spring, a gesture of hope for her aunt's continued recovery. "How can you tell?" Sarah asked, pressing soil over a bulb. "The older one, James? He makes me park my truck behind the garage. Says it compromises the property's aesthetic." Nathan's impression of James's precise diction was so accurate that Sarah couldn't help laughing. "And Daniel just stares at my clothes like I'm covered in something contagious." He shrugged. "Rich people, you know." Sarah didn't correct his assumption that she was different from her cousins. After all, she hadn't grown up with the Bennett wealth. By the time Aunt Margaret took her in, the business was already successful. But Sarah's parents had chosen more modest careers in education. The contrast between her upbringing and her cousins had always been stark. As the 1-year anniversary of her aunt's stroke approached, Sarah received an unexpected call from her academic advisor. If she didn't return to complete her degree within the next year, she would need to reapply to the program and potentially retake several courses. The news left her torn between her commitment to her aunt and her own future. That evening, as she helped Margaret prepare for bed, Sarah broached the subject hesitantly. "I might need to take some night classes next semester," she explained, adjusting her aunt's pillows, "just to keep my credits active. Mrs. Cooper could stay with you those evenings." She expected resistance, concern, perhaps even disappointment. Instead, Margaret's face lit up with the brightest smile Sarah had seen since before the stroke. "Finally," her aunt said. "I was wondering when you'd come to your senses." Sarah stared. You want me to go back to school? Did you think I wanted you to sacrifice your education? Margaret reached for Sarah's hand with her good one. I raised you smarter than that. But who will take care of you? We'll manage. 3 nights a week, Mrs. Cooper stays. Other nights, you study here. Her aunt's expression grew serious. Promise me, Sarah. No more postponing your life for mine. It was the same strength that had built a business empire from nothing. The ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to long-term potential. Sarah realized with sudden clarity that while she had been caring for her aunt's physical needs, Margaret had been caring for her future. The new arrangement began the following month. 3 evenings a week, Sarah attended classes, rushing home afterward to check on her aunt, despite Mrs. Cooper's assurances that everything was fine. The remaining nights, she studied at the small desk in Margaret's room, often reading passages aloud or discussing case studies with her aunt, whose business insights frequently surpassed those of Sarah's professors. It was on one such evening, as autumn painted the gardens in burnished gold and fiery red, that Margaret made an announcement that sent a chill through Sarah's heart. I've updated my will, she said casually, as if commenting on the weather. The lawyer came yesterday while you were in class. Sarah looked up from her textbook. That's good, I suppose. But let's not talk about such things. Margaret waved away her concern with her good hand. Death doesn't become more likely because we discuss it, dear. Nor less likely if we don't. She fixed Sarah with a penetrating gaze. I want you to know that I've seen everything this past year. Every sacrifice. Every kindness. Every moment you thought I was sleeping, but you were still here. Still caring. Her voice, stronger now after months of therapy, wavered slightly. A mother couldn't ask for more devotion from a daughter than what you've given me, Sarah. Something in her tone, a finality that Sarah wasn't ready to acknowledge, brought tears to her eyes. Don't talk like that. You're getting better every day. Margaret smiled, a knowing look that seemed to reach beyond the present moment. Just remember what I've taught you. Not just about business, about life, about what truly matters. Later that night, after her aunt had fallen asleep, Sarah stood at the window watching Nathan working late, installing solar-powered lights along the garden pathways, another of his thoughtful improvements. In the gathering darkness, the warm glow of the lights seemed to promise that even in the darkest times, guidance could be found if one knew where to look. Sarah awakened to the sound of rain pattering against the window pane. For a moment, disoriented between dreams and reality, she thought she was back in her college dormitory. Then the familiar scent of her aunt's rose-infused room freshener brought her fully into consciousness. She glanced at the clock, 5:30 in the morning, earlier than her usual wake-up time, but something had disturbed her sleep. A sound? A feeling? She slipped from beneath her blankets and padded quietly to the doorway connecting her room to her aunt's. The nightlight cast a soft glow across the antique four-poster bed where Margaret Bennett lay, too still. Sarah felt it before she fully understood, that profound absence that no medical monitor could capture. With trembling legs, she approached the bedside. Her aunt's face was peaceful, composed, as if she had simply decided it was time to depart. Sarah reached for the slender wrist, feeling for a pulse she already knew wouldn't be there. "Oh, Aunt Margaret," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not yet." The days that followed passed in a fog of arrangements and decisions. James took charge immediately, his efficient management style well suited to the logistics of death. Funeral home, cemetery plot, obituary, guest list. Sarah moved through these tasks like a sleepwalker, grateful in some distant part of her mind for her cousin's ability to handle details she couldn't bear to face. Daniel arrived from Los Angeles 2 days after his mother's passing, tanned and expensively dressed, his grief as carefully tailored as his Italian suit. "You should have called us sooner," he admonished Sarah over coffee the morning after his arrival. "We could have been here when it happened." "There wasn't time," Sarah explained, not for the first time. "The doctor said it was a pulmonary embolism. It happened quickly. in her sleep. What she didn't say was that Aunt Margaret wouldn't have wanted her sons rushing to her deathbed. She'd seen them clearly, accepted their limitations. The knowledge sat like a stone in Sarah's chest, that she alone had truly known the woman behind the business empire, the vulnerable human beneath the legend. The funeral was well attended. Business associates, employees, friends, and distant relatives filled the grand old church downtown. James delivered a polished eulogy, highlighting his mother's business accomplishments, her charitable contributions, the legacy she had built. It was eloquent, factually accurate, and somehow entirely missed the essence of who Margaret Bennett had been. Nathan attended the service, standing uncomfortably at the back in his only suit, which was slightly too small across his broad shoulders. He'd brought a bouquet of flowers from Margaret's own garden, late autumn blooms that Sarah recognized as having special meaning to her aunt. When he offered his condolences, his simple, "She saw beauty everywhere," moved Sarah more than all of James's carefully crafted sentiments. 1 week after the funeral, the family gathered in the ornate conference room of Margaret's attorney, Harold Winters. A distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Winters had managed the Bennett legal affairs for decades. He greeted each family member with solemn courtesy before taking his seat at the head of the mahogany table. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, opening a leather portfolio. "As you know, we're here to discuss the last will and testament of Margaret Eleanor Bennett." Sarah sat quietly, hands folded in her lap. She had given little thought to the will or any inheritance. Her mind had been occupied with more immediate concerns, canceling her aunt's medical appointments, writing thank-you notes for funeral flowers, trying to figure out how to resume her own interrupted life. James and Daniel, however, sat forward attentively. There was substantial wealth to be distributed. The jewelry business with its 15 locations, the Victorian mansion and its valuable acreage, investment accounts, art collections, and various other assets. Conservative estimates placed Margaret Bennett's net worth at over $20 million. "I'll begin with the primary bequests," Winters continued, adjusting his glasses. "To my son, James William Bennett, I leave 51% ownership of Bennett Jewelers, including all associated real estate, inventory, and accounts. Additionally, I leave the sum of $2 million in cash and investments." James nodded, his expression revealing no surprise. As the firstborn and the only child who had shown interest in the family business, he had clearly expected to inherit controlling interest. "My son, Daniel Joseph Bennett, I leave 40% ownership of Bennett Jewelers, my summer home in Cape Cod, my art collection, and the sum of $2 million in cash and investments." Daniel smiled, evidently pleased with his substantial inheritance. The summer home alone was worth several $1,000,000. "The remaining 9% of Bennett Jewelers," Winters continued, "will be distributed among key employees who have been with the company for more than 15 years, as detailed in Appendix A." Sarah listened without expectation. She had never worked officially for the company, had no claim to the business her aunt had built. Whatever Margaret might leave her, perhaps a financial gift to complete her education, would be generous and thoughtful, like everything her aunt had done. "To my beloved niece, Sarah Elizabeth Collins," Winters read, glancing up briefly to meet Sarah's eyes, "who has shown me the true meaning of family through her selfless care and devoted companionship during my illness, I leave my Singer sewing machine, model number 47, currently located in the East Attic storage room." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. "The sewing machine?" James finally said. "That ancient thing that belonged to grandmother?" "Yes, that's correct," Winters confirmed, his expression neutral. Daniel's laugh broke the tension. A short, incredulous bark. 2 years of playing nurse, and she gets Grandma's broken sewing machine? He shook his head. Mother always did have an unusual sense of humor. Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks. Not from disappointment about money, she had never expected wealth, but from the sudden crushing thought that perhaps she had misunderstood her relationship with her aunt. Had those late-night conversations, those business lessons, those moments of connection been merely the ramblings of a stroke-impaired mind, rather than the meaningful exchanges Sarah had believed them to be? "Is that all?" she asked quietly. Winters consulted the document again. "There is a personal letter addressed to you, which I have here." He removed an envelope from his portfolio and slid it across the table. "And Mrs. Bennet stipulates that you may continue to live in the main house for a period of 30 days following this reading, to allow you time to make new living arrangements." "Generous to the end," James commented, his tone making it clear he found it more than generous. "After all, the house will need to be sold. It's far too large for either Daniel or me to maintain, and the property taxes alone are astronomical." The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of legal terminology and signatures. Sarah clutched the unopened letter in her hand, unwilling to read her aunt's final words in front of her cousin's scrutinizing gazes. That afternoon, with James and Daniel occupied in meetings with the company's management team, Sarah climbed the narrow stairs to the east attic. The space was dusty and dim, illuminated only by small dormer windows. Family heirlooms and forgotten furniture created a labyrinth of memories. She found the sewing machine in the far corner, draped with a protective cloth that had once been white, but had yellowed with age. Pulling away the cover, Sarah revealed an ornate black Singer machine with gold decorative detailing. The craftsmanship was beautiful, even to her untrained eye, but the machine was clearly antiquated. She ran her fingers across the scrollwork, wondering what her aunt had intended by this peculiar bequest. Was it simply that Margaret had remembered Sarah's childhood interest in crafts? Or perhaps it was the only personal item not already promised to James or Daniel? The machine was heavier than she expected when she attempted to lift it. Surprisingly heavy, in fact. Bracing herself, she managed to raise it a few inches off the table, and as she did, something inside shifted with a metallic clunk. Sarah paused, then carefully set the machine back down. Upon closer examination, she discovered a small drawer built into the wooden base, the kind used to store bobbins and other sewing notions. The drawer was stuck, swollen from humidity and decades of disuse. Sarah worked carefully, wiggling it gently back and forth until it finally slid open with a protesting creak. Inside was not the expected collection of thread and needles, but a small velvet pouch, dark blue, and tied with a silken cord. Heart beating faster, Sarah untied the pouch and emptied its contents into her palm. Nestled there, catching the dim attic light in flashes of brilliance, were 3 items: a diamond pendant of extraordinary size and clarity, a pair of sapphire earrings that matched her eyes almost precisely, and a ruby ring surrounded by smaller diamonds. Even with her limited knowledge of jewelry, Sarah recognized that these pieces were extraordinarily valuable, likely worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. Beneath the velvet pouch lay an envelope, identical to the one Winters had given her but unmarked. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened it and unfolded the letter inside, immediately recognizing her aunt's elegant handwriting, steadier than it had been in her final months. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you've discovered the first part of your inheritance. Yes, my clever girl, there is more, much more, but it will require your intelligence and education to fully claim it. The gems you've found are just the beginning." Sarah sank onto a nearby trunk, legs suddenly unable to support her. She read on, her aunt's voice so clear in the written words that she could almost hear Margaret speaking them. "I've watched my sons become men who value what they have over who they are. They see wealth as an end point rather than a resource. They've inherited my money but not my understanding of its purpose. You, my dear, have shown me that you grasp what truly matters." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She wiped them away impatiently, eager to continue reading. The public bequest of this sewing machine was deliberate. James and Daniel will never look twice at what they perceive as worthless. They lack the curiosity to discover its secrets. But you see beyond surfaces, just as a good businesswoman must. A sound from downstairs, the front door opening and closing, reminded Sarah that she wasn't alone in the house. She quickly returned the jewelry to the pouch and slipped both letters into her pocket. The sewing machine, she decided, would need to be moved to her room immediately, before her cousins could take any interest in it. That evening, with her bedroom door firmly locked, Sarah spread the contents of the velvet pouch across her bedspread and continued reading both letters. The second one, hidden in the sewing machine, contained detailed instructions. The jewelry was indeed valuable, pieces Margaret had acquired early in her career and kept separate from the company inventory. But they were merely the key to accessing something larger. In my personal safe at Bennett Jewelers' headquarters, the letter explained, you will find documents establishing a trust in your name. The combination is your birthday, month, day, year. The trust contains $3 million, currently invested according to the strategy we discussed during our evening lessons. You remember, I hope. Sarah did remember. Those conversations hadn't been idle chatter from a stroke-impaired mind. They had been deliberate, purposeful preparation. The trust has one condition, Margaret's letter continued. You must complete your business degree. The funds will be released in full upon your graduation. Until then, you will receive a monthly stipend sufficient to cover your education and modest living expenses. The magnitude of her aunt's foresight left Sarah breathless. While publicly appearing to disinherit her, Margaret had secretly provided for her future more thoughtfully than a simple cash bequest ever could. She had protected Sarah's inheritance from potential resentment or legal challenges from James and Daniel, while simultaneously ensuring that Sarah would be motivated to complete her education. A soft knock at her bedroom door startled her from her thoughts. Quickly gathering the jewelry and letters, she concealed them in her dresser drawer before answering. Nathan stood in the hallway, a potted plant in his hands. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said. Mrs. Cooper let me in. I just wanted to bring you this. He offered the plant, a small orchid with delicate white blooms. It was your aunt's favorite, from her greenhouse. The unexpected kindness broke through the emotional armor Sarah had maintained since the funeral. Tears welled in her eyes, and without thinking, she stepped forward into Nathan's embrace. He held her awkwardly. The orchid pressed between them as she released the complex emotions of the day. Grief mingled with validation. Loss intertwined with a new sense of purpose. Thank you, she whispered, finally stepping back, for remembering her the way she really was. I overheard at the funeral, Nathan said hesitantly, about the will. The sewing machine. His expression was uncomfortable, caught between sympathy and not wanting to pry. Sarah surprised herself by smiling. It turns out Aunt Margaret still had a few lessons to teach me. She took the orchid from his hands. Would you like to come in for tea? I think I could use a friend tonight. As they sat in her small sitting room, Sarah found herself sharing the story of her aunt's hidden gift. Not the specifics of the trust or the jewelry, but the essence of Margaret's legacy. The wisdom that money alone held no value without the knowledge of how to use it meaningfully. She was preparing you, Nathan observed. All those months, she was making sure you'd be ready for whatever came next. Ready for whatever came next. The phrase echoed in Sarah's mind as she lay awake that night, planning her path forward. In 30 days, she would need to leave this house, the home that had sheltered her since adolescence. Her cousins would sell it, dividing the proceeds like everything else that could be converted to cash value. But Sarah now understood that buildings, like bank accounts, were just structures. What mattered was what you built inside them. Aunt Margaret had built knowledge in her, brick by careful brick, a foundation that couldn't be liquidated or divided. Tomorrow, Sarah decided, She would visit Bennett Jewelers' headquarters. She would open that safe, claim the documentation of her trust, and take the first step on the path her aunt had illuminated for her. Not as an heiress granted wealth without effort, but as a student still learning the most valuable lessons of her inheritance. Outside her window, the garden lights Nathan had installed glowed steadily in the darkness, marking clear pathways through the night. The headquarters of Bennett Jewelers occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. Sarah had visited occasionally during her childhood, but always as Aunt Margaret's guest, escorted through the hushed corridors and elegant showrooms like any other visitor. Today was different. Today she arrived with purpose, her aunt's letter folded in her purse and determination straightening her spine. The receptionist, an immaculately dressed woman in her 40s, greeted her with professional warmth. "Miss Collins, what a lovely surprise. We were all so sorry to hear about Mrs. Bennett." "Thank you, Diane," Sarah replied, grateful that she had made an effort to learn the names of her aunt's employees during her visits. "I need to access my aunt's personal office, if that's possible." Diane's smile faltered slightly. "I believe Mr. Bennett, James, has been using that office this week. Let me call up and see if it's available." While Diane made the call, Sarah surveyed the reception area. The design reflected her aunt's taste perfectly. Understated luxury that welcomed rather than intimidated. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, comfortable seating upholstered in soft cream leather, discreet display cases showcasing select pieces from the current collection. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, yet every detail conveying quality and thoughtfulness. "Miss Collins?" Diane's voice interrupted her observations. "Mr. Bennett says you're welcome to come up. 18th floor, as you know." The elevator ride gave Sarah time to compose herself. She hadn't expected to encounter James today. Her plan had been to slip in quietly, access the safe, and leave without drawing attention. Now she would need to provide some explanation for her presence, without revealing her true purpose. The doors opened directly into a spacious executive lobby where a second receptionist sat. Before Sarah could approach the desk, a door to the right opened and James emerged, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his tall, lean frame. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sarah, what brings you to the family business? Sightseeing before your eviction notice expires?" He refused to rise to the bait. "Just picking up some personal items of Aunt Margaret's, things with sentimental value." James gestured toward the open door. "Mother's office is all yours. Though I should warn you, I've already had her personal effects boxed up. Most of it is destined for storage or donation." The office beyond was large and corner-situated, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the city skyline. But the space was transformed from how Sarah remembered it. Margaret's collection of art glass paperweights no longer caught the light on the credenza. The photographs of family and long-term employees had been removed from the walls. The antique desk, a 19th-century partner's desk that Margaret had restored herself, was now covered with James's laptop, files, and a sleek digital photo frame cycling through images of his own achievements. "You've made yourself at home quickly," Sarah observed, unable to keep a hint of reproach from her voice. James shrugged. "The business doesn't stop for sentiment. We have 15 locations and over 200 employees counting on leadership." He checked his watch. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Will that give you enough time for your sentimental journey?" "More than enough," Sarah assured him. "Fine. Karen out front can help if you need anything." He paused at the door. "And Sarah, the maintenance team will be coming for Mother's personal safe tomorrow. If there's anything of yours inside, you should take it today." The door closed behind him with a soft click that nevertheless felt like a slammed exclamation point. His parting comment confirmed Sarah's suspicion. James had no idea what the safe contained. If he had known about the trust, he would have mentioned it, if only to diminish its importance or question its validity. Once alone, Sarah moved quickly to the wall behind the desk, where a large abstract painting concealed the safe. The canvas swung away on hidden hinges, revealing a sophisticated wall safe with a digital keypad. With slightly trembling fingers, Sarah entered her birth date, month, day, year, as her aunt had instructed. After a moment's hesitation, the safe clicked and opened. Inside was a single document folder, thick with papers, and a small jewelry box. Sarah removed both, closed the safe, and replaced the painting. She considered examining the contents immediately, but thought better of it. Better to review everything privately, away from the possibility of interruption. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell on a framed photograph that had somehow escaped James's purge. It sat on a side table, partially obscured by a stack of catalogs. Margaret Bennett, in her early 50s, standing proudly before the original Bennett Jewelers storefront. She was smiling broadly, her arm around a teenage Sarah, who had just won a regional science competition. The memory of that day flooded back. How Aunt Margaret had closed the store early to attend the awards ceremony, had taken Sarah for ice cream afterward, had listened intently as Sarah excitedly explained her project on crystalline structures. Sarah gently freed the photograph from beneath the catalogs and added it to the items she was taking. This, too, was part of her inheritance, the memory of being valued not for what she could provide, but simply for who she was. Downstairs, as she crossed the lobby toward the exit, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find Nathan approaching, looking oddly out of place in the elegant surroundings. He wore clean work clothes, khaki pants, and a forest green polo shirt with a landscaping company logo, but still carried himself with the slight discomfort of someone conscious of not quite belonging. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she had come to recognize. "Actually, I came looking for you. Mrs. Cooper said you'd mentioned coming downtown today, and I took a chance this might be where you were headed." Sarah glanced around, aware of the curious glances from the reception staff. "Let's talk outside," she suggested, leading the way through the revolving doors onto the sunlit sidewalk. Once outside, Nathan explained, "I wanted to catch you before you made any decisions about moving. I know the 30-day window is tight, and decent apartments are hard to find on short notice." He took a deep breath. "My grandmother has a carriage house behind her main property. It's small but nice. 1 bedroom, kitchen, living area. She's been wanting to rent it out, and I thought maybe you'd be interested." The timing seemed right. The unexpected offer touched Sarah deeply. Since Aunt Margaret's death, she had felt increasingly isolated. James and Daniel were focused on the business transition. Her college friends had continued their lives while she'd stepped away to care for her aunt. Nathan's thoughtfulness provided a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. "That sounds perfect, actually," she said. "I'd love to see it." "Great!" His face brightened. "Are you free now? I could drive you over." 20 minutes later, they pulled up before a charming Victorian home in a historic neighborhood just outside downtown. The main house was painted a cheerful yellow with white trim, surrounded by mature trees and well-tended flower beds. Behind it, accessible via a brick pathway through a garden, stood a smaller structure that had indeed once been a carriage house, but had been renovated into a cozy dwelling. Nathan's grandmother, Eleanor Miller, was a spry woman in her 70s, with Nathan's same direct gaze and easy smile. She welcomed Sarah warmly, explaining that she had been a nurse before retirement and had known Margaret Bennett professionally many years ago. "Your aunt was generous to the hospital's fundraising campaigns," Eleanor explained as she showed Sarah the carriage house. "Always donated beautiful pieces for our charity auctions. Never wanted recognition, just asked that the proceeds go to the children's wing." Duriki. This glimpse of her aunt's quiet philanthropy, something Margaret had never mentioned, further confirmed what Sarah had always believed about her aunt's character. The public image of the shrewd businesswoman had always been balanced by private acts of generosity that few were privileged to witness. The carriage house itself was perfect, recently renovated with hardwood floors, updated kitchen and bathroom, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The single bedroom was small but adequate, and built-in bookshelves along one wall of the living area would accommodate Sarah's modest library. Best of all, the rent Eleanor proposed was well within the budget Sarah anticipated from her trust's monthly stipend. "It's exactly what I need," Sarah told Eleanor, meaning more than just the physical space. The distance from her cousins, the fresh start, the connection to kind people who had known and respected her aunt, all of it felt right. Later that afternoon, after working out the rental details and agreeing to move in the following week, Sarah finally returned to her aunt's house, soon to be her former home. She closed herself in her bedroom and spread the contents of the safe across her bed. The document folder contained exactly what her aunt had promised: legal papers establishing a trust in Sarah's name, with detailed terms for disbursement. The monthly stipend was generous without being excessive, enough to cover her educational expenses, modest living costs, and even allow small savings. The full trust would indeed be released upon completion of her business degree, with additional incentives for continuing to graduate school if she chose that path. The jewelry box held another surprise: her aunt's personal collection of Bennett Jewelers prototype pieces, unique designs that had never gone into production but represented Margaret's creative vision for the company. A handwritten note explained that these pieces were both valuable as jewelry and as historical artifacts of the Bennett legacy, pieces that documented the evolution of the company's distinctive style. As Sarah examined each item, another layer of her aunt's planning became clear. Margaret had ensured that Sarah would be financially secure, but not wealthy enough to abandon her education. She had provided assets that would appreciate in value over time rather than a lump sum that might be squandered. And, perhaps most importantly, she had preserved a personal connection to the Bennett legacy that went beyond stock certificates or profit statements. A knock at her bedroom door interrupted her cataloging. She quickly returned the documents and jewelry to her purse before opening the door to find Daniel lounging against the doorframe, his expression uncharacteristically conciliatory. "Hey, cuz," he said, using the childhood nickname that had always irritated her. "James told me you stopped by the office today." "Just picking up some personal items," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. Daniel nodded, glancing past her into the room where the sewing machine now occupied a corner. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about. The sewing machine." Sarah tensed. "What about it?" "Well, I've been thinking. It seems kind of harsh, you know? You taking care of Mom all that time and ending up with just that old thing." He stepped uninvited into the room, approaching the machine with sudden interest. "It must have some sentimental value to you, since you brought it down from the attic." "It was your mother's gift to me," Sarah said carefully. "So, yes, it has sentimental value." Daniel ran his fingers along the ornate metalwork, his casual demeanor belied by the calculating look in his eyes. "The thing is, it turns out it might have some actual value too. I was talking to an antiques dealer friend yesterday, described it to him. Apparently, these old singers, especially the decorated ones, can be worth a few thousand to collectors." Sarah maintained a neutral expression, though internally she was alarmed. Had Daniel somehow discovered the hiding place in the machine's base? Did he suspect there was more to the bequest than appeared? "I hadn't thought about its monetary value," she said truthfully. The machine itself was not what mattered to her. Right. Sentimental value, of course." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. A family trait, it seemed. "But I was thinking, since James and I are letting you stay here rent-free for the month, maybe you'd consider selling it and splitting the proceeds with us. Seems fair, given the circumstances." The request confirmed that Daniel didn't know about the hidden jewelry or the trust. He was simply being opportunistic, as always, looking for easy money without effort. "Actually," Sarah replied, "I've found a place to live. I'll be moving out next week." "Really? That was fast." Daniel seemed genuinely surprised. "Where?" "A small rental. Nothing fancy, but it suits my needs." "And the sewing machine? You planning to take that antique dinosaur with you to your new place?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "Yes, Daniel. I'm taking my inheritance." Something in her tone must have conveyed her determination, because Daniel raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Just trying to help you out. That thing's probably worthless anyway." After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, contemplating the next phase of her plan. The trust would provide for her immediate needs, and the jewelry represented long-term security. But her aunt had given her something even more valuable: knowledge and a vision for the future. The company her aunt had built was now in the hands of men who saw it primarily as a source of wealth and status. The 9% ownership Margaret had distributed among long-term employees would provide some counterbalance to James and Daniel's control, but not enough to significantly influence company direction. Sarah opened her laptop and pulled up the Bennett Jewelers website. The company's core identity, quality craftsmanship at fair prices, pieces that celebrated meaningful life moments rather than mere ostentation, was already being eroded. The homepage now featured flashier designs, higher-end pieces clearly targeting a wealthier demographic. James was steering the company toward exclusivity rather than the accessibility Margaret had always valued. An idea began to form in Sarah's mind, not fully developed yet, but a direction, a way to honor her aunt's legacy while charting her own path. She would need to complete her education first, as Margaret had wisely stipulated, but the foundation was there, waiting to be built upon. That night, Sarah called the university to arrange her full return to classes for the upcoming semester. As she completed the registration process, she found herself adding a minor in sustainable business practices to her existing business administration major. The future of jewelry, she reasoned, would need to address ethical sourcing, environmental impact, and changing consumer values, areas where Bennett Jewelers, under James's leadership, was likely to fall short. One door had closed with her aunt's passing, but Margaret had ensured that many others remained open. Sarah just needed the courage and vision to walk through them. The first winter after Aunt Margaret's death proved challenging in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. The academic transition was smoother than expected. Her professors welcomed her back, and the evening business classes provided both intellectual stimulation and a community of peers. The carriage house became a true home, its small rooms filled with select treasures from her aunt's house, a few beloved books, the framed photograph from the office, and, of course, the Singer sewing machine, which now occupied a place of honor near the front window. What Sarah hadn't prepared for was the emotional aftermath, the periodic waves of grief that would catch her unawares, triggered by small reminders, the scent of her aunt's preferred tea, a piece of Bennett Jewelers advertising glimpsed on a billboard, the approach of holidays they had always celebrated together. During these moments, Sarah found herself rereading her aunt's letters, drawing strength from Margaret's confidence in her abilities and plans. Nathan proved to be an unexpected source of support. What had begun as a landlord's grandson checking in on a new tenant evolved into a genuine friendship. He would stop by after finishing work at nearby properties, sometimes bringing surplus vegetables from his community garden plot, or interesting plants he thought might thrive in the small containers Sarah had arranged on her tiny porch. Occasionally they would share simple meals, during which Nathan would listen as Sarah processed her grief or discussed her studies. "You're different from most people I know," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch swing, watching the early spring twilight settle over Eleanor's garden. "You've experienced this huge loss, and instead of being bitter about what you didn't get in the will, you're grateful for the lessons your aunt taught you." Sarah considered this. "I think because I lost my parents so young, I learned early that people are the real inheritance. What they teach you, how they shape your character, that outlasts any physical possession." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "My dad was like that. He died when I was 15. But everything I know about landscaping, about seeing the potential in a space, that all came from him." He gestured toward Eleanor's carefully designed garden. "My grandmother gave me a place to live after he died, but Dad gave me a livelihood, a way of looking at the world. These conversations deepened their connection, revealing complementary values despite their different backgrounds. Nathan's practical knowledge balanced Sarah's theoretical education. His contentment with simple pleasures helped temper her occasional anxiety about the future, and his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings provided a safe harbor as she navigated her grief. By late spring, their friendship had evolved into something more, though both approached the shift cautiously. Their first official date was modest: dinner at a local cafe, followed by a community orchestra concert in the park. Their second involved Nathan teaching Sarah how to plant her first vegetable garden in a small plot Eleanor offered behind the carriage house. By summer, they were spending most evenings together, either studying, Sarah, and sketching landscape designs, Nathan side by side, or exploring the city's parks and free cultural events. Meanwhile, Bennett Jewelers was undergoing its own transformation. Sarah tracked the changes through industry publications and conversations with former employees who occasionally sought her out. Knowing of her close relationship with Margaret, James had implemented aggressive expansion plans, opening 3 new locations in upscale shopping districts while closing 2 of the original stores in more modest neighborhoods. The company's advertising now featured celebrities and emphasized exclusivity rather than the meaningful moments marketing that had been Margaret's signature approach. The 9% employee ownership shares had been largely bought back through a combination of pressure and incentives. A few long-term employees had resigned rather than participate in what one former store manager described to Sarah as the dismantling of everything Margaret built. Daniel, meanwhile, had taken a nominal position as creative director, though his actual contributions seemed limited to attending industry parties and cultivating relationships with wealthy clients. His social media accounts documented a lifestyle of increasing extravagance: luxury vacations, expensive cars, celebrity associations, funded by his inheritance and company dividends. These reports confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the company's direction, but she remained focused on her own path forward. She excelled in her business courses, particularly those related to her sustainability minor. A paper she wrote on ethical sourcing in the jewelry industry received special recognition from the faculty and was published in a student business journal. She carefully managed her trust stipend, building a modest savings account while meeting her educational and living expenses. The Singer's sewing machine remained her most visible link to Aunt Margaret, though Sarah had transferred the hidden jewelry to a safe deposit box for security. She had researched the machine's history and discovered that Daniel's antique dealer friend had been correct about one thing. It was indeed valuable to collectors, particularly given its pristine condition and ornate decorative elements. Several specialized restoration companies had approached her after seeing the machine featured in the background of a local news segment about young entrepreneurs. Sarah had been interviewed about her published paper. She declined all offers, regardless of the amount. What she hadn't expected was that the machine would inspire a new direction in her studies. For a marketing class project, Sarah developed a hypothetical jewelry line, inspired by the vintage Singer's decorative patterns, intricate scrollwork translated into delicate metal designs. Her professor was impressed enough to introduce her to a friend who taught metalworking at the university's art department. Soon Sarah was taking an elective course in basic jewelry design, discovering an aptitude for translating concepts into physical forms. "You never mentioned you were artistic," Nathan commented one evening as Sarah showed him her first completed piece. A simple pendant, incorporating elements reminiscent of the sewing machine's decorative plates. "I didn't know I was," Sarah admitted, "but it feels right somehow, like connecting to something in my family history. Not just Aunt Margaret's business side, but the creative spirit that started it all." As her skills developed, Sarah began envisioning a more concrete future. The trust would fully mature upon her graduation in 18 months. Combined with the value of the hidden jewelry pieces and her growing expertise in both business and design, she saw the potential for a new venture. not a direct competitor to Bennett Jewelers, but something complementary, perhaps even collaborative if James and Daniel could recognize the value of returning to some of Margaret's core principles. This hopeful vision encountered its first major obstacle on a crisp autumn day, 14 months after Margaret's passing. Sarah was leaving her marketing ethics class when she received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller identified himself as Gregory Walsh, Chief Financial Officer of Bennett Jewelers, a new hire, someone Sarah had never met. "Miss Collins, I apologize for contacting you out of the blue," Walsh began, his tone professionally courteous. "But we've encountered a situation regarding your aunt's estate that requires clarification." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "What kind of situation?" "Our accounting team has discovered documentation regarding a trust established in your name, apparently funded with company resources prior to Mrs. Bennett's passing. Given that this arrangement wasn't disclosed during the official reading of the will, we have some concerns about its legitimacy." The implication was clear. James and Daniel were questioning the trust's validity. Sarah chose her words carefully. "The trust was established legally by my aunt with her personal funds, Mr. Walsh. It has nothing to do with company resources." "Perhaps," Walsh replied, his tone suggesting skepticism. "But as the controlling shareholders, Mr. Bennett, that is, James Bennett, and his brother feel this requires further investigation. They've requested a meeting with you to discuss the matter. Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient?" Though phrased as a question, it felt more like a summons. Sarah agreed to the meeting, then immediately called Harold Winters, her aunt's attorney. His secretary informed her that Mr. Winters was traveling internationally and wouldn't return for another week. Sarah left an urgent message, then sat in her car, breathing deeply to calm her racing thoughts. The trust documentation had seemed entirely in order, the funds clearly designated as coming from Margaret's personal accounts rather than company assets. But Sarah knew relatively little about the complex financial arrangements her aunt had maintained. Could there be some technical issue that would allow James and Daniel to challenge the trust? That evening, she shared her concerns with Nathan as they walked through a nearby park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. "It sounds like intimidation to me," Nathan said, after listening to the details. "They found out about the trust, and they're jealous, or worried you might use the money to compete with them somehow." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But what if there is some legal problem with how Aunt Margaret set things up? I'm not sure I can afford a prolonged legal battle with them." Nathan took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "You're not facing them alone. I'll come with you tomorrow." Sarah shook her head. "I appreciate that, but I think I need to handle this myself. Aunt Margaret believed I could." The following afternoon, Sarah arrived at Bennett Jewelers' headquarters precisely on time, dressed in a professional blue suit she'd purchased specifically for important business meetings. The receptionist, a new hire who didn't recognize her, directed her to a conference room on the executive floor. James and Daniel were already seated at the long table, along with Gregory Walsh, and a woman introduced as Melissa Hargrove, the company's legal counsel. The power dynamic was immediately apparent, 4 against 1, with Sarah positioned at the end of the table while the others clustered at the head. "Sarah, thank you for coming," James began, his tone suggesting this was a routine business meeting rather than what felt increasingly like an ambush. "We wanted to discuss this trust situation directly, keep things transparent and within the family." Sarah nodded but remained silent, recalling a negotiation tactic her aunt had taught her. Often the first person to speak after an opening statement reveals weakness or concedes ground. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, James continued, "Our concern is simple. We've discovered that Mother established this trust for you just 3 months before her death, when her health was already significantly compromised. The timing raises questions about her capacity to make such decisions. And the amount is substantial," Daniel added, leaning forward. $3 million that should rightfully have been part of the estate distributed according to the formal will. Mrs. Bennett's mental capacity was never legally questioned during her lifetime, Sarah responded calmly. Her doctors confirmed that while her physical abilities were limited by the stroke, her cognitive functions remained intact. The trust was established with her full knowledge and intention through proper legal channels. Nevertheless, Hargrove interjected, the circumstances warrant review. Mrs. Bennet's official will, executed in the presence of multiple witnesses, made no mention of this trust arrangement. One might reasonably conclude that she intended her estate to be distributed solely according to that document. Sarah recognized the strategy. They were suggesting impropriety without directly alleging fraud, hoping she would become defensive or agree to a compromise out of uncertainty. Mr. Winters handled both the trust and the will, she stated firmly. If there had been any legal conflict between the two, he would have addressed it. Winters, James said dismissively. Mother's loyalty to that dinosaur was one of her few business missteps. We've transitioned to more contemporary legal representation. Walsh slid a document across the table. We're prepared to offer a settlement. $250,000, paid immediately, in exchange for dissolving the trust and signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding this matter. Sarah didn't touch the paper. Less than 10% of the trust's value. But guaranteed, Daniel pointed out. No conditions about finishing school, no waiting period. Cash in hand today. And if I decline? Hargrove's smile was thin and professional. Then we would unfortunately need to challenge the trust's validity in court. Such proceedings can be lengthy, expensive, and, of course, would freeze the assets until resolution. The threat was clear. They were betting that Sarah couldn't afford extended litigation, that she would accept their lowball offer rather than risk losing everything in a protracted legal battle. They were using the very resources Aunt Margaret had built to undermine her final wishes. Sarah stood, gathering her purse. I'll need to consult with my own legal representation before responding to this offer. James raised an eyebrow. You have an attorney? I will by the end of today, Sarah replied, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. I'll have them contact Ms. Hargrove to continue this discussion. As she turned to leave, Daniel called after her. You know, Sarah, for someone who got a broken sewing machine in the official will, you're being awfully particular about an arrangement that might not even be legally binding. Sarah paused at the door. That sewing machine taught me something important, Daniel. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't what they appear to be at first glance. She walked out with her head high, maintaining her composure until she reached her car in the parking garage. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the fear churning beneath her calm exterior. Her cousins had resources, legal representation, and a willingness to play hardball. All she had was her aunt's trust in her abilities and the truth about Margaret's intentions. As she started her car, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't just defend the trust, she would fulfill the greater legacy her aunt had entrusted to her. Whatever it took, she would find a way to honor both the letter and spirit of Margaret Bennet's final lesson. The offices of Blackwell and Chen occupied a modest suite in a converted industrial building on the city's west side. Unlike the gleaming corporate headquarters of Bennett Jewelers, this space featured exposed brick walls, refinished hardwood floors, and furniture that prioritized comfort over status. Sarah sat in a worn leather chair across from Maria Chen, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 40s, whose reputation for representing individuals against corporate interests had led Sarah to seek her counsel. Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly, Chen said, reviewing her notes. Your aunt established a trust for you before her death. The trust was legally executed by her longtime attorney, Harold Winters. The funds came from her personal accounts, not company assets. And now, 14 months later, your cousins are suddenly challenging its validity and offering a settlement significantly below its actual value. That's correct, Sarah confirmed. They're suggesting that my aunt wasn't mentally competent when she established the trust, despite medical documentation to the contrary. Chen tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. And they're implying that if you don't accept their offer, they'll tie the matter up in court until you can't afford to continue fighting. Yes, they know I'm still a student with limited resources. Classic intimidation tactics, Chen observed. But they're overlooking something important. If they challenge the trust in court, they'll create a public record. The media loves stories about wealthy heirs fighting over money, particularly when there's a sympathetic figure like yourself involved, the niece who cared for her aunt during a long illness, only to be challenged by cousins who rarely visited. Sarah hadn't considered the potential for public relations damage. You think that would matter to them? Bennett Jewelers trades on its image as a family business with traditional values. A messy public fight over your aunt's mental capacity and final wishes could tarnish that image considerably. Chen set down her pen decisively. Here's what I suggest. We request complete documentation of all trust assets, confirming they came from your aunt's personal funds. We ask Harold Winters to provide a formal statement regarding Mrs. Bennett's mental state and intentions when establishing the trust. Then we respond to their offer with a firm but professional rejection, making it clear that any challenge will be vigorously defended, in public if necessary. The strategy made sense, but uncertainty still gnawed at Sarah. What if they're not bluffing? What if they do take this to court? Chen's expression softened slightly. Legal battles are never ideal, but sometimes they're necessary. If it comes to that, we'll be prepared. But my instinct says they're testing your resolve. They expect you to fold under pressure. The following day, Sarah called Gregory Walsh to provide Maria Chen's contact information, indicating that all further communication should go through her attorney. 2 weeks of silence followed, during which Sarah threw herself into her studies and tried to keep her anxiety at bay. Nathan provided steady support, accompanying her on long walks where she could voice her fears without judgment, and reminding her of her own strength when doubts threatened to overwhelm her. Harold Winters returned from his international trip and immediately provided the requested documentation and statement, his indignation at the cousins' tactics evident in every carefully worded paragraph. Chen drafted their formal response to Bennett Jewelers, rejecting the settlement offer in unequivocal terms while leaving the door open for a more reasonable discussion if the brothers truly believed there were legitimate issues to address. The reply came not from the company's legal department, but in the form of a text message from Daniel, asking to meet Sarah for coffee, alone. Chen advised against any unofficial communication, but Sarah's intuition told her this might be important. They met at a small cafe far from both Bennett Jewelers and Sarah's usual haunts. Daniel arrived 15 minutes late, his designer clothes slightly rumpled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting recent sleepless nights. "You look awful," Sarah observed as he slumped into the chair across from her. Daniel managed a sardonic smile. Always the charmer. He ordered a triple espresso from the passing server before continuing. "Look, I'm going to cut to the chase. We have a problem at the company." "We?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I'm not part of Bennett Jewelers' management." "No, but your family. And this affects your trust, too." Daniel lowered his voice. "James has made some bad decisions. Expanded too fast, borrowed too much. The new locations aren't performing, and we're hemorrhaging money." Sarah absorbed this information, careful not to reveal her thoughts. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of their childhood, when he would confess to breaking some household rule. "Because this stupid fight over your trust is a distraction we can't afford right now. It was James's idea. He's desperate for liquid assets. I told him it was a waste of time and legal fees, but he wouldn't listen." "So you want me to accept the settlement?" Sarah asked incredulously. "No, I want you to keep the damn trust," Daniel replied, surprising her. "But I need something in return. Information, perspective, whatever you can remember about how Mother handled downturns. The old guard at the company won't talk to me. They think I'm just a spoiled rich kid who doesn't know anything about the business." The assessment was accurate enough that Sarah had to suppress a smile. Why not ask James? He worked with Aunt Margaret for years. Daniel's laugh was hollow. James thinks he knows better than Mother ever did. Says her methods were outdated, too conservative. But those outdated methods kept the company stable through 2 recessions. He leaned forward. "I'm not asking for your trust fund, Sarah. I'm asking for what Mother taught you during all those months you spent with her." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah, that Daniel now valued the very knowledge he and James had once dismissed as worthless. "I'm not sure what I could tell you that would help. I'm still a student with a published paper on ethical sourcing in the jewelry industry," Daniel countered. "Yeah, I read it. It sounded like Mother talking. All that stuff about sustainable practices and connecting with customers' values rather than just their wallets." Sarah studied her cousin's face, searching for signs of manipulation or deception. Instead, she saw something unexpected, genuine worry, perhaps even fear. "How bad is it, really?" Daniel glanced around before answering. 3 of the new locations might not make it through the holiday season. The custom design department James gutted was apparently more profitable than he realized, and the long-term employees who left took their client relationships with them. He sighed heavily. "James doesn't know I'm talking to you. He'd kill me if he found out. What exactly do you want from me, Daniel? Meet with me. Maybe once a week. Look at some numbers. Give me your perspective. In return, I'll make sure the trust issue goes away. No more legal threats, no more settlements." Sarah considered the offer carefully. There was risk in getting involved, even peripherally, with the company's current troubles. But there was also opportunity, a chance to preserve some part of her aunt's legacy, to perhaps guide at least one of her cousins toward a more sustainable path. "I'll think about it," she promised. "But I need one thing from you first. Name it. Tell me why you really care. Is it just about the money? About protecting your inheritance? Or is there something more?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, staring into his empty espresso cup. "You know what's weird?" he finally said. "I actually miss her. Not just the money or the security, but her. The way she could see through people's bullshit with one look. How she always knew exactly what to say to make you feel either 10 feet tall or 2 inches high, depending on what you needed." He met Sarah's gaze directly. "I was a lousy son. I know that. But I don't want to be the guy who destroyed everything she built." The admission, unexpected and seemingly genuine, shifted something in Sarah's perception of her cousin. Perhaps there was more of Margaret Bennett in Daniel than anyone had recognized, including Daniel himself. "I'll help if I can," she decided. "But we do this my way. No shortcuts, no quick fixes, and James can't know, not yet." Their unlikely alliance began cautiously. Sarah would meet Daniel at his apartment, review financial reports and marketing strategies, and offer insights based on both her academic knowledge and her conversations with Aunt Margaret. Daniel, to her surprise, proved to be an attentive student when motivated by genuine concern rather than mere obligation. Mother always said the holiday season reveals a company's true relationship with its customers, Sarah explained during one such session. It's not just about sales volume, but about creating experiences that people associate with their most meaningful celebrations. Daniel nodded, taking notes. Another unexpected development. The new marketing focuses almost exclusively on luxury gifting. James says that's where the profit margins are. That's short-term thinking, Sarah countered. Aunt Margaret built customer loyalty by being present at all of life's milestones. First job jewelry that was affordable but well-crafted, engagement rings with flexible payment options, anniversary pieces that could be upgraded over time. She created customers for life, not just for a single purchase. Gradually, Daniel began implementing subtle changes in his areas of influence, primarily marketing and customer relations. He reinstated the company's tradition of personalized follow-up with recent purchasers. He shifted some advertising budget from luxury magazines to more accessible platforms. Small adjustments, but ones that honored Margaret's approach while working within the constraints James had established. The trust issue, as promised, disappeared. The company's legal counsel informed Maria Chen that Bennett Jewelers would not be pursuing any challenge to the trust's validity. Sarah continued her studies, now augmented by this practical application of business principles. Her jewelry design skills continued to develop as well, and she began selling small pieces through local craft fairs and an online storefront. Modest operations that generated more enthusiasm than profit, but valuable experience nonetheless. Nathan's landscaping business was thriving as well. What had begun as a one-man operation had grown to include 2 employees and a steady stream of residential and small commercial clients. He had a natural gift for creating beautiful outdoor spaces within clients' budgets, and his honest, unpretentious manner earned him both referrals and repeat customers. Their relationship deepened over the months of shared challenges and mutual support. They were different in many ways. Sarah's academic orientation balancing Nathan's practical skills, her family complications contrasting with his straightforward relationships. But these differences complemented rather than conflicted, each providing perspective the other might otherwise miss. "I've been thinking," Nathan said one evening as they sat on the porch of the carriage house, watching fireflies illuminate Eleanor's garden. "My lease is up next month." "Oh?" Sarah replied, sensing something significant in his tone. "I thought maybe, if you wanted, I could move in here. With you." He stumbled slightly over the words, his usual confidence momentarily faltering. "Or we could find a new place together. Whatever you'd prefer." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, considering. The carriage house was small for 2 people, especially with her growing collection of jewelry-making equipment, but the thought of coming home to Nathan each day, of building a shared life together, felt right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "Let's start here," she decided. "See how it works. We can always look for something larger if we need to." Their domestic transition was interrupted by an unexpected crisis. 2 weeks before Christmas, with the retail jewelry industry in its busiest season, Daniel called Sarah in a panic. "James has checked himself into some kind of wellness retreat," he explained, his voice tight with stress. "Exhaustion, they're calling it, but it's more like a complete breakdown. He's authorized me to handle things while he's gone. But Sarah, it's worse than I thought. The holiday numbers are coming in, and they're disastrous." Sarah agreed to meet him at the company headquarters that evening. The executive floor was deserted except for Daniel and the CFO, Gregory Walsh, who looked considerably less polished than during their previous encounter. Spreadsheets and reports covered the conference table, telling a story of declining sales, mounting debt, and customer alienation. "The luxury strategy is failing," Walsh admitted, pointing to the figures. "Our traditional customer base feels abandoned, but we haven't successfully attracted enough of the high-end market to compensate. And the new locations are performing at less than 40% of projections." "What about the remaining original stores?" Sarah asked. "Better, but still down compared to previous years. We've lost too many long-term customers and employees." Daniel looked to Sarah, desperation evident in his expression. "I've been implementing some of the changes we discussed, but it's too little, too late." What would Mother do in this situation? Sarah studied the numbers, thinking about the business principles her aunt had emphasized during their months together. Aunt Margaret believed in facing reality directly, then making decisive corrections. She said finally, "You need to close the underperforming new locations immediately. They're draining resources the company can't spare. Refocus on the core stores and rebuild relationships with your traditional customer base." "That would mean writing off millions in investments," Walsh protested. "Better than losing the entire company," Sarah countered. "And you need to bring back some of the experienced staff who left, even if it means offering incentives or ownership stakes." The Bennett Jewelers' reputation was built on relationships and expertise, not just products. The discussion continued late into the night, with Sarah drawing on everything she had learned from her aunt and her business courses to help formulate a survival strategy. It was nearly midnight when Daniel walked her to her car, the winter air sharp with cold. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not saying I told you so, for helping, despite everything." "It's what Aunt Margaret would have wanted," Sarah replied. "She loved this company. It was never just about profits for her." Daniel nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I've been thinking about the sewing machine," he said unexpectedly, "about why she left it to you specifically." Sarah tensed slightly. "Oh? It was her mother's, our grandmother's. Did you know that? Grandmother used it to sew the velvet display pouches for the first Bennett Jewelers store, back when they couldn't afford professional packaging." He looked up at the company logo illuminated on the building. "Mother kept that machine all these years, even when she could have bought 1,000 new ones, because it reminded her where we came from, that the business was built stitch by stitch, not overnight." The insight surprised Sarah, both its accuracy and the fact that it had come from Daniel, who had once seemed so disconnected from the company's history. "That's why she left it to you," he continued, "because you understand that value isn't just about price tags. It's about history, meaning, connection." He turned to face her directly. "I think she wanted you to be part of the company's future, Sarah. Not just through your trust, but directly, actively." The suggestion hung in the air between them, unexpected and compelling. Sarah had been envisioning her own path, separate from Bennett Jewelers. But perhaps there was another possibility, one that honored both her aunt's legacy and her own emerging vision. "Let's focus on saving the company first," she said pragmatically. "Then we can talk about its future." The following weeks were a blur of activity. Daniel, with Sarah's guidance, implemented drastic but necessary measures. 3 of the new locations were closed immediately. The remaining 2 were redesigned to better align with the company's traditional values while maintaining a contemporary appeal. Key former employees were contacted with offers to return, sometimes in enhanced positions that recognized their value to the company. Most significantly, Bennett Jewelers launched a heritage collection for the post-holiday season. Pieces inspired by the company's archives, but updated for current tastes. The collection included several designs based on Sarah's sketches, though she insisted her name not be associated with them publicly. The response was encouraging. Modest, but steady sales that indicated customers were receptive to the company's return to its roots. As winter turned to spring, the crisis atmosphere gradually subsided. James returned from his retreat, initially angry about the changes, but eventually acknowledging their necessity given the financial situation. The company remained in a precarious position, but the immediate threat of collapse had been averted. On a warm evening in early May, Sarah sat at her workbench in the carriage house, now rearranged to accommodate both her and Nathan's presence. She was putting the finishing touches on a special piece, a pendant based on the decorative scrollwork of the Singer sewing machine, but incorporating small diamonds and sapphires from one of the pieces her aunt had hidden in the machine's compartment. Nathan entered quietly, observing her work. "It's beautiful," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Special occasion." "Graduation," Sarah replied. "It's only 2 weeks away now." She carefully set the pendant in its velvet-lined box, a box crafted by hand, reminiscent of the ones her great-grandmother had sewn for the original Bennett Jewelers store. "Have you decided?" Nathan asked, understanding the question that had been weighing on her mind for months. "About Daniel's offer?" The day after completing her final exams, the full trust would be released to Sarah's control. Daniel had proposed that she consider investing a portion of it in Bennett Jewelers, taking an active role in the company's redesigned creative department. The position would allow her to influence product development and marketing strategy, potentially steering the company back toward Margaret's vision, while introducing sustainable practices Sarah had studied. "I think Aunt Margaret wanted me to find my own way," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But maybe that way includes honoring what she built, just in a new form." She closed the jewelry box, decision made. "I'm going to accept, but with conditions. I want to develop an entirely new line, accessible pieces with ethical sourcing and production, something that brings Bennett quality to customers who might never have considered themselves the Bennett type before. Nathan smiled. She'd be proud of you, finding a way to both preserve and transform her legacy. As they sat together on the porch swing, watching twilight settle over Eleanor's blooming garden, Sarah reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. From caregiver to student to businesswoman, from grief to purpose, from an inheritance that appeared worthless to one whose true value couldn't be measured in dollars. The Singer sewing machine gleamed in the window of their small home, its ornate metalwork catching the last rays of sunlight. Not just an antique or a clever hiding place, but a symbol of where the Bennett legacy had begun, with creativity, craftsmanship, and the understanding that true value often lies beneath the surface, visible only to those who take the time to look more deeply. "You know," Sarah said softly, "when Aunt Margaret first got sick, I thought I was putting my life on hold to care for her, but she was actually preparing me for a bigger life than I could have imagined. Teaching me, testing me, believing in me." Nathan took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "The best inheritance isn't what you get," he reflected. "It's who you become, because of the people who loved you." The truth of this resonated deeply as Sarah looked toward the future, a future shaped by Margaret Bennett's final, most meaningful gift. Not the trust fund that would provide financial security, nor the jewelry that represented material wealth, but the wisdom to recognize that legacy is measured not in possessions, but in purpose, not in acquisitions, but in actions. The sewing machine that had once provoked her cousin's derision now stood as a testament to this understanding. Outwardly, an antique of modest value, inwardly containing treasures both material and metaphorical. Just as Margaret herself had been more than the successful businesswoman the world had seen, she had been a mentor, a visionary, and ultimately a loving aunt who believed her niece capable of carrying forward the true Bennett legacy. The knowledge that lasting value is created stitch by stitch, choice by choice, day by day. As darkness fell, Sarah and Nathan moved inside, turning on lights that illuminated their shared home. A home built not on extravagance, but on understanding. Not on inheritance, but on intentional choices. The path ahead would hold challenges, certainly, but Sarah faced them with confidence, equipped with both the practical resources her aunt had provided and the far more valuable inheritance of Margaret Bennett's wisdom, values, and unwavering belief in her potential. The sewing machine stood witness, its metal gleaming in the soft light, no longer just an inheritance, but a promise kept, a legacy honored, a future embraced. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.